In other news, Hillary Clinton has joined the chorus of voices in the American establishment and media accusing Vladimir Putin of personally orchestrating the hack attacks that allegedly helped to decide the outcome of the US presidential election. Moreover, she said that Putin went after her because he had an axe to grind.
We have to recognize that, as the latest reports made clear, Vladimir Putin himself directed the covert cyber attacks against our electoral system, against our democracy, apparently because he has a personal beef against me.
Clinton explained that Putin apparently couldn't forgive her for criticising the Russian 2011 parliamentary elections, which she did as then US Secretary of State. Ron Paul, who is the chairman and founder of the Ron Paul Institute, joins me now to discuss her remarks, as well as our other top stories from the day. And however I introduce you, Dr. Paul, it really doesn't do your illustrious career justice, but we'll suffice with that, and also add that, of course, you were a former presidential candidate. Let's just get that in there. If I may, let's start talking about the Russian hacks, alleged Russian hacks, and Hillary Clinton's response, and the Democrats in general. In essence, you've got Clinton, Obama, and a few others blaming a foreign power for their party losing in a democratic election. Do you buy that?
No, not really. I think they're just agitating because they lost the election, and they're throwing out accusations, and they have no proof. Even our own CIA, that's implying that this hacking was done. They're anonymous sources. The FBI disagrees with them. And the other day when somebody was speaking for the administration, the press person, he was sort of giggling to him. It looked like he was going to giggle because he knew it was all a joke. And I think most people see it that way, but it's political. And I think the motivation has been soreness because of losing election. The same people who are making all these charges, they didn't seem to be worried a bit by the Secretary of State having a private server, which made it much easier for Russia or anybody else to know what was going on. That seems to have been lost in this this fiasco here. But I think there's a lot of false charges going on, and then anybody like myself that might try to get objectivity to it, then they accuse us of all sorts of things, like we're just stooges of the Russian government or something like that. It gets pretty nonsensical, but I think decent people understand what's going on and realize this is just political grandstanding.
Now, the US considers its democracy to be the greatest in the world. I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, hackers, are they actually capable of making such a difference? You would have to sway millions of voters to affect the result of a presidential election. Are they capable of having that kind of impact?
Well, I'm not the expert on this technology, but the people that I've read and listened to, and I happen to believe that, no, the technology, the internet connections, it's not possible for somebody outside the country or even within the country to go in because the computers aren't connected to the internet. So, yeah, I think they're all false charges. But we've had trouble with elections for a long, long time. The first time I ever ran for office, way back in 1976, I mean, we had a court case and everything else, and 1,500 people in a little congressional race that voted, and they didn't even exist. So this has been going on for a long time. The other thing that really annoys me is I don't know exactly what other countries do, and there's a lot of shenanigans, and a lot of people are guilty of doing, you know, terrible things. But when I look at my own government, I've been confused, and over the years, I've criticized our own CIA. Because if you want to look for trouble, the American people should be worried about the influence of our CIA in other people's elections. I mean, probably hundreds. It's constant. It's been that way over the years. And all of a sudden to say that maybe somebody has done something to us to influence an election is such a, and it really being a stretch, without even considering the fact fact that our CIA has a very, very bad reputation. When you think of the books now that have been written about our domestic assassinations and connecting it to the CIA, people should be more worried about our CIA and how it treats American liberty and American privacy. I consider that the most important thing, rather than looking for a fight with somebody overseas.
The narrative as well, the details of the allegations, they have evolved with time. To start with, it was loosely connected with Russia. Russia was hacking and was trying to affect the outcome of the elections. Then it became more specific. It was the Russian government. And amazingly, it's like something out of a Days of Our Lives, out of one of your soap operas now. It's become very, very personal. Hillary Clinton saying it was Vladimir Putin personally leading this hack attack and that it was a personal vendetta because of criticisms that she made about the democracy of the 2011 Russian parliamentary elections. So it's a real escalating situation. What do you make of all that?
All I know is I think it's exaggerated, it's charges made to get attention, to continue this attack on the authenticity of our election, claiming that, the confusion up by the popular vote and the electoral votes, which it can be confusing to some people, and just trying to destroy the credibility of the next administration. I personally was not a super supporter of Trump, but I also recognize when people are trying to undermine, the administration, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to discredit it and say that, well, we have to stop it. We have to have these investigations. They had, some hearings scheduled, but there's no way the CIA is going to come in and try to verify the charges that they made, because even when they announced these charges that the Russians are involved, they had no facts, and like I said before, the FBI doesn't even agree with that. So I think it's political grandstanding to try to discredit Trump, and sometimes I think he sets himself up for this, but and the people suffer. I, as a libertarian, believe in non-intervention, non-involvement in the governments overseas or alliances overseas, and we would have a lot less of this because it'd be less than a motivation for anybody to be involved with messing around with our government. So, but now I think it's been turned into a domestic thing, an election thing, but I think that's just to amplify the arguments between Republicans and Democrats. But of course, my argument is our government doesn't change a whole lot. Republicans or Democrats, they fight and fume. But the people who behind the scenes control the government are always the same. And I consider that to be the case in most governments. There's always some secret group of people who have more power than the rest. And sometimes it's in a dictatorship, it's certainly the case. In a democracy, that is the case too. There's people who have more power than others, and it's usually associated with money. And that's a thing that I think we should be talking about, but I don't think that's what this issue is all about. I think it's overpower and one party trying to discredit the other party, but the truth is the people behind the scenes are the ones who really have the power, not the political pundits.
Of course, all of these hacking claims could be put to one side if we had definitive proof. We would need the CIA to come forward with that. Interestingly, Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, he touched upon this. Let's just listen to what he said.
As chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, I returned to Washington this week and requested the CIA to provide a briefing on Russia's cyber capabilities and its involvement with the US presidential election. The CIA refused this request. It's disappointing that the CIA would provide information on this issue to The Washington Post and NBC, but will not provide information to elected members of Congress.
I mean, he does make a fairly obvious kind of point there, doesn't he? Why on earth would the CIA be giving out secret information to the media and not to Congress?
No, it's part of it. I mentioned about the secret government and the powers behind the scenes, and the media is part of it. The military-industrial corporation, they're behind it too. So yes, the government will feed the media, and the media feeds on it. They did it in the election. They've done it. They've done it for many years, and that is where the real corruption is. But Johnson is right. Well, why don't they just come forward? But whatever is convenient to make their case, to find out who's going to have the political power. And it's very messy, and there has to be a better system. But my idea of having a better system and not allowing so much corruption to increase in the government is have less people in the government, and not have so many opportunities for people to sell favoritism and to control things, control the economy, and have wars that you don't need to know. I mean, when you see this combination of the media dealing with our government, then it's almost a monopoly control of why our government has to be in the Middle East, and why we have to go into Libya, and why we have to be in Iraq and Iran, and go into Syria. But it's always a combination. The propagandists are on the side of the people who want us to be intervening around the world. And I imagine, because Trump has suggested maybe we ought to do a little bit less of that, maybe they don't like that idea and they want to discredit him for that approach.
I'd like to move on to fake news now, and the story today about Facebook. They're bringing in their own list of fact checkers now. What was your response to this? I mean, some people are quite concerned about this is going to hit alternative news organisations.
Well, in some ways that might not be a bad idea. True censorship is when the government does it. But when you take Facebook and how close they work with, the CIA and other groups in our government, you wonder about it, but we don't have the details about that. But the other thing that bothers me is the person that is doing the funding along with Facebook, and that's Soros. And Soros is not on the side of us who want less government and more freedom and more honesty in government, because Soros symbolizes something that we don't like. So he's close to the group that we put into the category of shadow government, and the deep state. And when he gets involved with either Facebook or Google, it should be that in a free society, if you had an organization like that and there was no connection with government, yes, people should have a right to monitor what goes up. If people put up lies and profanity, they have a right to monitor it if it's a private organization. But when they turn over our records, because they have tremendous records on all citizens, not only American citizens, everybody else, when they work in cahoots with the government to give this information to it, and then decide, well, we're going to control the media. If Ron Paul starts talking about why we shouldn't be in Syria, we might do ABC, and that means that the investigation ought to be is, how does the government influence what Facebook is doing? What Facebook does, if they want to monitor it and set standards, that's one thing. But if they're working along with the government and picking out terms, matter of fact, there was one list where they said if Ron Paul or others start talking about, well, the danger of the Federal Reserve, and how powerful they are and they're doing the wrong thing, that they tag that and say that's fake news. So this is terrible. If it's a private organization, they have a right to monitor, and they probably will make mistakes, but that is so much different than when a company like Facebook works with the government. That's where the real danger is.
I'd like to move on to the hot topic of, well, for as long as I can remember now, Aleppo. I mean, it is a big mess. It's very hard for us to establish exactly what's going on there. Very few sources on the ground. But I just want to make a point about the accusations have been coming that there's been a massacre there. There's been a lot of criticism of the Syrian and the Russian forces and how the Russian Air Force bombed Aleppo in its attacks on the militants, the terrorists there. And I just wondered, why is everybody talking about that, but nobody's talking about, for example, Mosul, where pretty much you've got the same thing going on. Even the UN itself has said thousands of civilians have been killed, but they said that, oh, but that's because the terrorists were using human shields. Now, it seems like it's the same situation in both cases, but Mosul gets no attention. Why is that?
Well, in one sense, we were on the side of protecting or going after Assad, and so therefore we so-called sympathized with some of the radicals, to maintain their presence in Aleppo. But when it comes to Mosul, it's the opposite case. We were on the side of saying, well, we got to get rid of the radicals there because we're in that situation sympathetic with the government. That to me is just hypocritical and shows what a mess it is. And as a non-interventionist, if we had our way, that stuff wouldn't exist because we'd have never been in the Middle East. We wouldn't be fighting these wars. We wouldn't have gone in and done these things. But there's so many different factions that it ends up where American money and troops and weapons end up in the hands of people we think are supposed to be our enemies. At the same time, there's a strong faction in this country that wants to make sure that the relationship between the United States and Russia doesn't get a little bit better. And of course, the argument of the founders of this country and my position is the more you trade with people and the friendlier you are, the less likely is we're going to fight with people. So here these people who want to interfere are getting rid of what I think is most valuable, and that is trade with people.
But Ron, just finally, I just want to, if I may,
trade goes on.
I just want to pick up on the aspect of civilian lives being lost, because it is thousands in both cases. And yet it seems like the governments pick and choose when they want to complain which civilians die. Is it used, do you think, now in the modern world by governments as a political tool, civilian deaths? They talk about it, complain about it when it suits them, and then when it doesn't, they turn a blind eye.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and that's why I was trying to point out, that a libertarian believes that we should stay out of all of it instead of picking and choosing and getting involved. But that is the case that if it fits your policy to criticize some people getting killed or even fudge the figures on who's getting killed and who's doing it, it's just to serve their political interests. And, the division is in the U.S. Congress. You take a guy like McCain, he certainly has a different opinion than Donald Trump, and they don't get along together. There's a big difference. So then they pick and choose to blame. The factions will pick and choose to blame who's killing whom. And I think it's tragic. And of course, my goal is to advocate a foreign policy where there's less of that. And my foundation is the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. I happen to believe that it's conceivable, and always believing at the end of the Cold War was a magnificent opportunity for us to come together and not have to have an enemy to fight. And yet we've been able to work on that, and they spend a lot of time. So somebody has to get blamed, and they'll use those statistics, and it'll be in the media that, civilians being killed in Syria might be considered quite a bit different because it's a different category if it's happening in Iraq. And they're trying to say, well, we really had a tremendous victory in Iraq, that type of thing.
Ron, I love your outlook. If you had a few more million people with the same view, perhaps the world would be a bit more peaceful. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. Many thanks. Former presidential candidate, chairman and founder of the Ron Paul Institute. Ron Paul is my guest.